episode of the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's a bonus episode of the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Come on now!
Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I went to church as a kid growing up, and it was a pretty good experience. I really rather enjoyed it. I didn't understand everything that was going on, but it was a cool part of our week, and I got a little bored by the end of the sermons, but I liked being there, and I remember being treated really well. I really liked the singing. I remember back then we had hymnals. There wasn't any kind of projection or anything. That just wasn't how you did it. You had books, and you looked in the books, and there would be at least 4 different vocal parts that were written like in sheet music, and people knew what to do with that. It was wild. And then all the dads would try and get down and get the real low notes, and they would always sing the little bonus lines, like the little echoes and stuff, in the blood of the Lamb, of the Lamb. I think all those dudes wanted to be the bass from the Oak Ridge Boys when I was a little boy. No, that's not true. All the dudes in my church growing up wanted to be Keith Green. Have you heard of Keith Green? He's a Christian musician, a singer, songwriter. He's a pianist. He's kind of like an early Christian version of Ben Folds, just very bold, very straightforward lyrics that aren't real sing-songy. They're just direct, like, whoa, dang, that's what you're thinking. And a great pianist. And he had this super curly hair. I don't know if that was natural or not. He was like late 70s, early 80s. I was a little kid when he died in a plane crash, which if you're a musician, I mean, that really solidifies you forever in people's minds. I mean, you're young forever. But I think all those dudes in my church, like thinking back on it, they all had perms. Their hair was all curly, like Keith Green. Maybe that was the fashion for everybody back then, but I think it might have just been a thing that everybody really admired, that particular Christian musician. Oh, that's funny. I haven't thought about that in a long time, but I liked going to church. I liked it when they did baptisms. They would slide open that mural and you could smell it when you came into church because the little bit of chlorine in the water and stuff, like maybe that put some ozone in the air or something. You were like, what's that smell? Oh, somebody's professing their public faith in Jesus Christ today. And it was awesome. I loved hearing the stories and something about seeing people like all dignified and stuff and then coming up out of that water all wet and sputtering and spitting. I don't know that I understood why that mattered, but it meant a lot to me. It was meaningful. We did little children's sermons back then. My dad was a pastor at this church that I was at growing up. The sermons, I really liked the first part of the sermons. Dad did a really good job of making it make sense and setting up what we were going to be talking about. And then as we got a little more into it, I would fade off because I was a little kid and I didn't know the material. And Dad is a really well-studied, well-educated, very intelligent, hyper-competent man. And so sometimes he would get way into the deep water. And for me as a little kid, I couldn't match pace with that. But also, like, Dad's a pastor, right? So you're supposed to pay attention and you can't screw around or anything. So I was allowed to draw a little bit on the bulletins. I could get away with that. And then when my younger siblings were old enough, we would play tic-tac-toe, but eventually they reached the age of tic-tac-toe maturity where they figured out that if they played their cards right, it should be a tie every time. So I quit winning and that got boring. Then we played that little dot game where you draw the lines between the dots and you try to see who can be the one that closes out the most squares formed by drawing those lines. And that was all right. And then I remember my parents being like, hey, it's maybe time to quit goofing around like that. And then I got a calculator watch. And I could look at my calculator watch real discreetly and like play number games and spell dirty words and turn my watch upside down and giggle and stuff. But then I think Mom figured out that you could do that. And so then I couldn't use my watch in church anymore. All of which I think was completely reasonable, by the way, the constraints being put on me by my parents. I got no problem with that. But eventually, this is such a roundabout way of getting where we're going, but it's a conversation I felt like having with you today. So here we are. Eventually, I figured out that nobody could ever get mad at me during a sermon. Nobody ever got mad. That's an exaggeration. The church I went to was cool. Nobody could ever be distracted, let's go with that, by me during a sermon if I was spacing off, if I was looking at a Bible. And so I just started poking around at the Bible during those sermons when I'd start to zone out and reading the really juicy stuff from the Old Testament. And then one day, I'll never forget this, I discovered in the Bible that I had borrowed for that day of church, the full color maps. They have these in the back. They're amazing. And even this old Bible I have in front of me right now that I've been using forever. I mean, this Bible is practically from the days when your television was in black and white, but the maps, they are still full color, my friend. And I am turning in those maps right now to the map of the Babylonian kingdom. It's gorgeous. And now I got the map of the Persian kingdom right here. Look at this. This is actually really helpful for the stuff that we're talking about. It says where Lydia is and Babylon, and there's Jerusalem. And whoa, look how big the Median kingdom is. And there's little tiny Persia way down there in the corner of the map. That's crazy. I used to stare at these things and think about faraway places and learn about that. And then we get to the end of the sermon and Dad would like make the wrap up point. And I'd be like, this is the part I should probably listen to. This is probably important. I'd be like, okay, yeah, I get it. And then we'd talk about it at lunch. I'd tell him he did a great job because he did a great job. But in my heart, I was also thinking about those maps. The point of all of these reminiscences was to talk about those maps, but I suppose another valid point is that it's good to be humans together and hang out from time to time. But about those maps. After I stared at those maps for a while, then when I went back and read the Bible, it helped it feel more like that was happening in a real place where I could empathize and feel the ebb and flow of the story and the distances. And I think it would be helpful for us to have a common touch point for that as we unpack the story of this incredibly volatile, very important era in the 6th century BC. Now, ultimately, our story about Esther is going to be in the very beginning of the 5th century BC, but all of our setup is going to take us through the tumult of the collapse of Assyria, the rise of Babylon, the collapse of Babylon, and the rise of the Persian Empire, which gets us to the opening verses of Esther. So there's a lot of geography here, and I think it's all going to work way better and make way more sense if we do a quick little map exercise. So here's what I've done. I grabbed a map of the ancient world in the 6th century BC that we're looking at. I made it partly transparent, and I dropped it to scale over a map of the modern United States. I know tons of you are not from North America, and I'm sorry to have to go with a very American-centric approach to this exercise, but it's the geography I know the best, and I'm guessing the geography that most of you listening know the best, so that's what I'm going with. Thank you for your grace with me on that particular thing. But in this exercise, what I did is I just lined it up in a way where most of that map of the ancient world we're looking at sits physically to scale over the top of most of the landmass of the United States. And then I figured to help you get a sense of distances and how everything relates to each other, I would just describe what I'm looking at here. And so again, my strategy for how I positioned the ancient world map over the United States was I tried to get the most land on top of the most land. And having done it that way, what I'm seeing here in front of me is that on my layered maps, the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Mexico are over the top of each other, with the Persian Gulf extending up into Louisiana and Arkansas. So Persia, the homeland of Cyrus the Great and the kings of Anshan, who we're going to be learning about, it sits squarely over the top of Alabama and Mississippi. India sits clear out in the Atlantic Ocean, past the Bahamas. It's a long ways out there. The Medes at this time would control a whole bunch of stuff ranging from the Dakotas through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, the Great Lakes, Indiana, Kentucky, the Carolinas. They covered a lot of ground, and they were horse people, so that's why the Medes could do that. The heartland of Babylon in this exercise would sit right in the middle of Kansas and Oklahoma. So that gives you a sense of how far Babylon is away from the old homeland of Persia. And the two great rivers of Babylon, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in this exercise would have the Tigris starting up around the Black Hills of South Dakota and going through central Nebraska and then emptying into the Persian Gulf around the border between Oklahoma and Arkansas. The Euphrates curves off a little bit to the west. It would start near Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then go down through Fort Collins, Colorado, out through western Kansas, and down through Oklahoma, where it would almost join the Tigris as it empties into the Persian Gulf at that same border between Oklahoma and Arkansas. The homeland of the ancient Assyrians would be Casper, Wyoming, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Scottsbluff, Nebraska, Rapid City, South Dakota, Estes Park, Colorado, Loveland, Longmont, Denver, Colorado. All of that Mountain West stuff would be where the Assyrians are from. And actually, the geography there would be pretty similar. That lines up kind of neatly. Really, that's kind of crazy. The geography of the Medes lines up fairly neatly with what the topography is like in the part they would occupy as well. Intriguing. Yeah, and really sort of the same for Babylon. This is a very interesting fluke now that I'm looking at it. Jerusalem and Judea would sit in extreme western Colorado, like Grand Junction, Colorado, just getting toward the border of Utah. And then if we went down the coast of Israel and Judea into Egypt, the major cities of Egypt would correspond roughly to Las Vegas, Nevada, and Phoenix, Arizona, with Southern California, like Los Angeles and San Diego, all being a part of Libya or the desert parts of Egypt way out in the wilds. The Red Sea from the Exodus would sit in southern New Mexico and Arizona and extend down into Mexico itself. And then the Arabian Peninsula would cover New Mexico and all of Texas and a whole bunch of Mexico as well. Asia Minor and Turkey on this map would correspond to Jackson, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. And then most of Oregon would be the Aegean Sea, that little extension of the Mediterranean Sea that cuts up into the Greece homeland. And then in the extreme northwest of both of our maps, the Kingdom of Macedon, where Alexander the Great is from, that would correspond with Vancouver, British Columbia. And then Sparta would be on the Oregon coast just south of Portland. And Athens would sit out in the Oregon desert in central Oregon. So to sum up, Persia is in the American South, Mississippi, Alabama. Babylon is in the southern Midwest in Kansas. The Medes would live across the northern plains in the Dakotas, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, the Great Lakes area. Jerusalem and the Jewish people, when they were in their homeland at least, would have lived corresponding to western Colorado, just getting out toward Utah. The main cities of Egypt would have corresponded with Las Vegas, Nevada, and Phoenix, Arizona. The Mediterranean Sea would cover all of Northern California, Nevada, almost all of Utah. Turkey or Asia Minor would correspond to Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. And then Sparta, Athens, Macedonia, all those Greek kingdoms would correspond with the northwestern Pacific coast. Hopefully that gives you a sense of how long it would take to get everywhere, how big a hassle it would be to move an army between all of these places, how difficult it might be to have communication between these places in a very pre-electronic age. Hopefully it gives you a sense of how varied the topography and geography and climate might be as we move between these different locations. And hopefully, in general, it just gives us a point of reference that makes us both feel more oriented to how this story plays out. Oh, yeah, and I should mention the Persian capitals that we're going to be looking at. Susa, the place where our whole story of Esther is happening, corresponds on this map to basically Branson, Missouri, extreme southwest Missouri. Persepolis, another one of the capital of the Persians, corresponds roughly to Jackson, Mississippi. In my weird way of thinking about things, that would be helpful. Maybe for you that just is confusing and not helpful at all. If that's the case, you can just go look at some maps if you want to, and that'll probably work. But for me, I feel like I understand how all this fits together way better having done this exercise. So at the very minimum, thank you for humoring me. At the very maximum, hey, high five. We understand the geography of this thing better, and now we're better equipped to move forward empathetically as we understand the world in which the people who are on screen in this story lived. Fun. Thanks for listening to my story and for thinking about geography with me. I appreciate you. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.